Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. The topic today is how to set up your dev environment for Vanjaro. So let's get started. All right, so what we're going to do is get right into it. We're setting up dev environment for Vanjaro. The idea here is that you want to be able to build the Vanjaro source code and send pull requests or make modifications and so forth. So the very first step we want to do for that is to make sure we have a Vanjaro site. So let's start by doing that. We're gonna go from the scratch. So I'm gonna set up the basic components like IIS and SQL. So it might be very familiar to some of you guys, and so just bear with me while we get through it. So there's two basic necessary components to installing a Vanjaro site. Is you have to have IIS to host it, and then you have to have a SQL Server for your database backend. So let's get right into it. What I have here is a VM that I just set up for this webinar. It's a brand new VM. So we're just going to go ahead and get some of these tools and get started. So the first thing I want to do is get Sql Express. Now you could use Sql Express or you can use the SQL Development Server, so the developer edition I meant. So either one would work fine. We'll just go with the Express edition for this case. Keeps the install time shorter. So I just downloaded the SQL file here, and then I am just getting the SQL to start. We're just going to go with a basic installation and go right through it. All right, so now that that is started, we'll let it do its thing. It's going to download a bunch of things and install it. It's going to take a little while, maybe a few minutes here. We'll let that do that in the background. And what we're going to do is go ahead and set up our IIS. So to do that, I'm just going to go to the Start menu and type in, let's see, add remove programs. We'll go right there. And I'll get to programs and features. Now I'm doing this on a Windows 10 machine, desktop machine. If you're running on a server itself, then you can use the server roles to go ahead and do this. But basically, I'm going to turn Windows features on and off. And here I'm going to find IIS right there. So I'm going to check that. And then other thing I want to do is go into the www services. And for application development, make sure I have ASP.NET 4.8 and then 3.5 if we're doing anything older. But that should be good. Let's hit OK here, and we'll let it do its thing. It's going to download a bunch of files and get that prepared for us. So again, should be a couple of minutes, and it's probably not going to finish until we have the SQL Server finished. So while we wait for these two things right here to finish installation, and here's our SQL Server is doing its thing. Its download is complete. It's now doing installation. Let's go ahead and go to the GitHub repository so we can download the Vanjaro installer. So let's go back up here and say GitHub Vanjaro, and let's go up to the repository. So that is the Vanjaro GitHub repository right here. What we want to do is go to the releases. You can go to the latest version. And we want to download the Vanjaro setup. So let's go ahead and do that. This you're going to have to say, I want to keep this file because it is unsigned. So it comes from an unknown publisher, but you just have to say keep anyways, and that will download through. Now, feel free to ask any questions at any time, either through chat or you can talk either way. Again, this is all usual stuff we're doing. Manjaro setup is now downloaded, so I'm going to go ahead and run that. Again, it's saying this is from unknown publisher, so I'm going to go ahead and run it anyways. And we'll go ahead and get that installed. So just clicking through multiple times, and now we're installing Vanjaro installer, and that part is done. So I do see the Vanjaro installer icon right on the home page. All right, so we got all of our prereqs kind of in place. We just have to wait for the SQL Server here to finish installation, and then IIS to kind of finish through. Now, this is all we need to set up the Vanjaro site. But since today we're covering how to set up your develop environment, we're going to need a couple more things. Now, to save time, I've already have the Visual Studio 2019 installed and Visual Code 2019. You don't need both. The VM that I'm using, the evaluation VM, came with the development environment setup. So Visual Studio 2019 was pre-installed. But if you don't have Visual Studio 2019, you can always grab that as well. The community edition is sufficient, which is free. So you can always load that for free. And you can grab a copy from here and install that. In our case, that is already installed and set up. So we'll skip that part. There's one more thing we need to be able to build our source codes in Vanjaro, and that is Node.js. So what I'm going to do is head over to Node.js site and download the latest version as well. So let's go to Node.js and download the recommended for most users, the LTS version. All right, let's cover a couple more steps while we're waiting for Sql to install. So we're not just here waiting to progress while we move along. The second thing you want to do is, if you have not forked the Vanjaro repository, then you want to do that. So you can have your own fork and then kind of do pull requests through that. So you would need to have a user account at GitHub. Again, you can sign up for free, and then you just want to go to GitHub Vanjaro repository, which is the github.com/Vanjaro software/Vanjaro.platform, or just search GitHub Vanjaro, and it'll bring you down here. And then you simply click on the fork icon down on the right. Now, once you do that, it's going to ask you to sign in, and it will create a fork for you. It's just literally a one-step process. What I'm going to do right here is show you really quick what a fork looks like. I've already signed in, and I've already clicked on fork, so that already created a repository for me. So in my your repository, I see Vanjaro platform, but you'll notice this is my fork. It says down right here, fork from Vanjaro software/Vanjaro.platform. And then if you do it for your username, you'll see your own username followed by that. So this is, again, a crucial step because we'll be using this to go ahead and set up your dev environment. All right, so I think I've covered everything we need to in terms of getting this going. Now we just have to wait for this. It's almost there. Looks like about 70%, 60% there. So, all right. Okay. So let's just start off where we left off from. I do have the installer, Manjaro installer installed. And so, like I said, this is the backup. I've already created a dev.manjaro.local site. So we're going to go ahead and create a new one and kind of go from there. Let's just call it test.manjaro.local. Again, what name you give is totally up to you. So I'm just going to type in test.manjaro.local and pointing to my local Sql Express, and I'll hit create new site. So now what Manjaro installer does, it grabs the latest version of the platform from GitHub. It's extracting it for us. It created the app pool. It created a DS entry for that. It set up the permissions for us, and basically kind of open up the browser so we can go ahead and get the Manjaro site installed. All right, so that is the first step. Once we have our Manjaro site installed, we will then set up our dev environment. So I'm going to go ahead and just get this going and give it a few minutes to go ahead and install Manjaro site. I'm going to minimize that. While it does that, if you remember, I had downloaded Node.js. So you want to make sure you double click on Node.js and install that too. Again, this is a backup VM, so I've already done that on this side. Once you have Node.js and Visual Studio 2019, we are ready to go ahead and set up our dev environment. Okay, so let's go back here, and I talk fairly fast. It's only 12 seconds since I've switched away from that browser. So we'll give it a couple more minutes here for the site to install. Now, while it's doing that, we can go ahead and start preparing. So let's go ahead and start Visual Studio 2019. What we want to do is clone our fork that we created earlier on GitHub and bring a copy of that here so we can use that to build the source code. Now, I don't want to do that really until my site is ready, so I'm going to just wait here a couple minutes for the Manjaro site to get installed, and seems like it's almost there. Now, what we do want to do is you want to go to your fork and you want to go to the code and you want to copy the URL here to your repository, and just click this button here and that copies it for you. You want to make sure you're doing that on your fork and not necessarily on the original repo. Right. So it says installation complete. I'm just going to hit visit site, and that should bring our Vanjaro site into view. All right, there we go. So that's Vanjaro site installed on test.vanjaro.local. And I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then let's go back to our C drive to take a look. And then what the installer did for us is basically created the test.vanjaro.local folder, set up the logs for us, set up the website folder, extracted all the files here, set up the permissions on the website folder. And then if you look at the host files, then you will see that it created that entry for us. So all that was done by the Vanjaro installer to kind of make sure that site is ready to go in one-click install. Now, what we want to do is get our source code in this folder right here, but we can't clone to that directory because to clone, you need to have an empty directory. So what I'm going to do right now, and this is again one-time process, is I'm going to rename. And before I rename this, let's stop the application. So if it's in use or there's a scheduled instance or something's kicking through, it will not let me rename. So let's go ahead and just kind of stop the application pool. And what I'm going to do is just rename this to maybe original. It's still open. All right, David says reset IS. I'll go ahead and do that. Let's give it one more try. Yep, no, that didn't work. All right, so let's do that. We'll just do IS reset, and we could have done this through here as well. You could just hit stop and restart as well. So IS has restarted. Let's go ahead and change this map. What I'm going to do is create another directory temporarily, call it website, and we're going to clone our source code here, and then we'll merge the two folders down the road. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this path. What we're going to say to Visual Studio is let's clone our repository, and this is the path we want to bring the data, the source code to. And then, like I said, we went here and we copied our repo URLs. I'm going to bring that in. We paste that in here. This is where we're copying. This is the repo location. So let's go ahead and do that. So hit clone, and again, we'll give it about a minute or so. Visual Studio goes ahead and downloads all the source code and sets it up for us. And then we'll continue with our merge. All right. So Visual Studio has completed copying the source code. I'm going to close Visual Studio now, and we'll come back to it. So let's look at the website folder really quick. Here's the website folder. If you notice, that's all the source code that we just stored clone. It's really important at this point, and what we want to do is want to make sure that in your folder options, you are looking at hidden files. If you're not looking at hidden files, then you won't see this Git folder. That's right there. So make sure you are looking at hidden files, because what I want to do here is take all these files, just cut them, and I'm going to take back to that website original and just kind of paste in here. So basically, we're merging a Vanjaro install with the source code. This will allow us to kind of basically create a dev environment where we could build and actually test it against a working site. All right, so it's done copying. We're just going to replace all the files in destination. Just replace all. All right. Now, if you look at the original website folder, it is empty now, so we can get rid of it. We no longer need that. And what we're going to do is rename this one back to website. The reason we did this because this was the original folder that had all the permissions applied. So we want to keep the same folder. And there we go. So we're all set now. At this point, I can go ahead and turn the site back on too. And we can now go to website folder, and we have our Git folder there. We have all the other necessary files, including a Vanjaro platform solution file that we can open up. So again, this is a one-time process that we did. Once you've set up the dev environment, you don't have to go through this process again. It's all good to go. The last procedure here that's still left to do to set up our dev environment. So when you open this for the first time, because we did manual merging of the files, there'll be a lot of changes that Git had tracked here. We're just going to simply get rid of them all, and that will set up our dev environment. So what I'm going to do here is, so we want to go to Git changes here, and still loading. It's kind of slow, but there we go. We see 1,600 some changes here in Git. So again, this is, like I said, a one-time thing because we set up manual merge. It's tracked all those files. We're just going to simply come here and delete all these changes, and we'll be done. All right, so I'm just going to right-click here, hit delete. And we have a clean slate now, so we are good to go. The last step here is to build a source code, make sure it builds and everything's good, and we are golden. All right, so we basically build the source code here. The build may take a little longer here because, like I said, it's a slower VM. But while it does, I mean, we can just kind of explore how everything is organized in terms of source code. There's about 70 projects right now which make up Manjaro platform. So we did have Node.js installed, and Node.js is called as one of the build process to build and bring all dependencies from NPM and so forth. So it's doing all that right here, as we see behind the screens, and updating all the files and getting us everything we need to build the source code. So there's 70 different projects here. We want to take a look at libraries, which is the most important one. We got Manjaro.core, which is the heart of Manjaro. That's where all the core logic is. That's the framework right there. Those familiar with DNN, we have a Vanjaro.container and Vanjaro.skin, and these are nothing but a DNN skin and DNN container, which allows us to then basically swap out the native functionality of DNN theme and DNN container with the Vanjaro specific features. Vanjaro.common is our common framework for user interface. So all the plugins and all the user UI stuff that you see used consistently across Vanjaro is all here. Whether that's Bootstrap, whether there's any other frameworks, they're all kind of right here. And then we have our own framework written that kind of builds the UI automatically for us. So that's this right here. Vanjaro.migrate is the Vanjaro for DNN extension. So all the code which helps you take a DNN page and migrate to Vanjaro is here. In terms of the platform itself, the whole platform is DNN extension, but this specifically here is the code that helps you take an existing DNN page and migrate the content over to a Vanjaro page. All right, let's look at Vanjaro.url. So Vanjaro.url is the URL provider for DNN, which Vanjaro uses and then makes available to all the apps to handle all your slugs and URLs. So if you have an application that manages its own slugs, you don't have to write the logic yourself. There's a library built in that you could use to do that. All right, so 70 succeeded in build. So all good there. We got our source code built. The next here is Manjaro Ux, and this is perhaps one of the most important ones as well. This is what we call the user experience. This is the bar, the control panel, the user experience manager that you see on the left of a site. Now let's hit our site, make sure we didn't break it by building it. But that's what you see on the left, the site menu and everything that's coming through here. So these are the core libraries that drive Manjaro. Now, a lot of is an open architecture, so you can add and build by adding extensions. So there's two kinds of extensions. There's core extensions, and these are just two things here. For example, there's built-in workflow in Manjaro. So all the UIs and workflow integration that happens is handled through this review extension. And then there's some UI for notifications, whether they're tasks or their messages coming through, that is handled through this project right here. And then if you look at the user experience manager, the site menu that goes on the left of a Vanjaro site, that is all powered. The UI of it is all powered. The core is again powered through here, but all the extensions that get plugged into it is powered through this. So we can kind of take a look at that. There's the site. Let me see if I can log in really quick. And if I remember, username password. I hope I do. Okay. Not bad. Can still recall passwords. All right. So if you notice, we see this ls everywhere. So that's a good sign that we are now running off the source code that we just built. The ls stands for that this text is localized. And I believe it stands for that it is, the S stands for maybe it's, I can't recall exactly, but I think it stands for it's a global localization. Kind of helps you point which localization RES files you need to look at. But if you can see, all that is happening. Now, if you were to build this in release mode, then the ls stuff would obviously disappear. We're currently building in debug mode, so that's why we see all that stuff. Again, that's kind of automatic. So let's look at the UX manager here, just to kind of understand. This is what we call the toolbar at the bottom. So if you notice in our source code, we have a toolbar folder in UX, and there's a lot of different projects in it. Now, each project is basically a separate extension. For example, this device mode icon right here, that is just that extension, this one. And so for each one, whether it's just a redo button or undo button or a preview button, we have a separate extension. What that really means is it's open architecture. You could create your own extension and then just have a new icon appear here, which does exactly what's custom to your business needs or logic without changing the source code. You don't have to change the core Manjaro source code. You simply create an extension and it will plug in. Now, these extensions are pretty simple. You just implement a, interface, I toolbar item here, and then you basically say, okay, what is the name and what icon do you want to use, and so forth. So it's pretty simple stuff. When you click on it, there might be right here, there's on click. You can choose your action, what do you want to do when somebody clicks on it, and then you just, in this case, we're just calling a JavaScript method, but you can do whatever you want. You can change that to an href, I believe, or so forth. So very simple architecture to go ahead and create your own extensions, and that was just toolbar. So let's look at the menu. Now, this menu right here is the menu that you get when you click on this right here. So all this menu is driven by, again, extensions. So if you wanted to write something of your own and have a category menu appear, it is super easy. Let's look at the help menu as an example. Let's find help here. There it is. And what I'm going to do is just go down here, and you can see this is simply implementing iMenu atom. And there you just created a hierarchy of your menu, and you've given it some text, which is localized here. Again, a view order, and there's hierarchy. So you could have nested and so forth, and we can look at an example of that. But it's super easy. And then when somebody clicks on it, it's really up to you what you want to do. If it's a hierarchy, then it will automatically manage that. So let's look at an example of that too. For example, if you go to design, if I go to custom styling. So let's look at custom styling as an example. Just called custom CSS actually. So you go down here and there's an interface. So you see there's a hierarchy we have custom CSS, but that is inside design. And so this kind of automatically does it for you. So just by creating these lines, we have a infinitely nested menu, which automatically the core creates for us. So when you click on design, it will create custom styling right underneath it. And then what happens when you actually create a custom styling is for you to implement. And let's see, somewhere here should be. Go ahead. Yep, looks like we had somebody in there. I thought they were asking a question, but so right here is the event. There's a bunch of different events. Like I said, we lost one regulated on click, and this one, this seems like an application, and we're going to get into detail of all these, how to build these in future webinars. The goal today was just to set up the environment which we have and just kind of cover the overlay structure. But a very cool thing I just want to share, because I'm looking at it, is a lot of these menus have what we call search keywords. So a lot of time you got this huge menu thing, you don't know what to look for. For example, I'm looking for an SSL setting. So if I just type in SSL, it'll tell me it's in security, and it'll take me right there. So I don't have to hunt for it. And that is powered simply by you providing a bunch of keywords that you want to respond to your menu item to respond to. So it's super easy. These keywords are localized, so anybody can change them, but of course, you can hard code them. So it's like super easy. You don't always have to. So basically, there is what we call a navigational. There's a search-based navigation, and then there's a organized hierarchy-based navigation, both built in. So very easy. All right, let's continue on. So far we've looked at this part here. We've looked at these. And then there's your blocks menu right here. This is where all the blocks are. So if we are to, and all the integrations are under their own folder, but they're just menu items. All of these are actually applications. So what I mean by that, let's say if I were to really quick go to Azure and just click on it, you will see that it actually brings up UI, which is an application itself. An extension point. And you can see that we have the views for that kind of right here. All you got to do is have some markup, and the UI is built automatically. And like I said, I'm going to go into detail in future webinars. We're going to have some of the team leads join us from Manjaro, who's going to cover these in detail. But if you notice, we have our own UI engine, and it's super easy. You just add things here, and it builds the UI automatically. So if you ever have to change the look and feel of it, we do it at the core level once, and every single app gets automatically updated. So super easy. There's just a JS that goes with it. That's where you do your own gluing to your web API controllers. The controllers are defined here. Everything is kind of automatically handled with this UI in terms of the permissions and so forth. So you can attribute things based on permissions and so forth. Again, we'll cover that in detail. That all this is powered by what I was originally saying is our Vanjaro.com and UI library. This powers all the UI and makes it super easy for us to create UIs basically instantly. So let's continue just looking at the organization of the project structure. So we've looked at the menu part. Let's look at the blocks. Now these blocks here, these are server-side blocks. The distinction is that they're actually rendered through server-side. So let's go back here and take a look which blocks I'm talking about. These are the design blocks. So think of these as the skin objects we're familiar with DNet. If you want to add your own, you could very easily create one, and they'll start appearing here. Again, each one of these called for a separate webinar, how to create a design block and so forth. So I'm just covering the organization structure today. But let's if we were to look at the menu right here, it's super easy to kind of create these. You just go ahead and interference I block, which is you're creating a block, and then it is an extension. So you implement that as well, just by doing that, this is just some path which by default you get when you create a block, but you can override them. These are just pointing to where your views folders are and so forth. So super easy in terms of how to create design blocks and so forth. We'll go into deep dive in there. Every design block has what we call, let's see, ACS HTML that goes with it. And that part is actually part of theme. So the entire presentation is 100% customizable. There's nothing that the core or the framework dictates. So you control 100% HTML and you control 100% styling through our theme builder as SaaS, and we'll look at it. But if you just want to connect dots here, if you go to Vanjaro.core, we'll see there's themes, and in the basic theme, if you go to blocks, there's an associated menu block. And in the menu block, there's templates. So there's a CS HTML, which you decide what is rendered in HTML. That's 100% up to you. You could create multiple of these, and then within your site, you have a config option to choose what kind of template you're using. For example, you wanted a vertical menu or something else. You just simply change that through the block settings and so forth. So these are design blocks, and there's a lot more that we're going to cover in what design blocks can do and what they're good for. Then what you have here on the top, now these are client-side blocks. These are totally being run on JavaScript. There's no server-side component. So when you drag a button out here, we don't really need a server-side aspect to it. It's just fitting a bunch of HTML and some JavaScript if it needs to go along with it. So again, we'll have separate webinar on how to create your own client-side blocks and so forth. Then you got, of course, your apps, which are like DNN modules and so forth. They will start appearing underneath once you install them. And there's nothing specific here. We do have a folder here called apps. So let's look at that and what that is doing. The context of apps here in Vanjaro is, so let's say you have an icon right here. If I double click this, I get this window pop up right here, which lets me choose from different icons, right? And I can search through them. Same goes if I click on a image, it gives me an image picker, a video picker, and so forth. So these are what we are calling apps for internal apps. So if you look right here, that the icon app is right here. When you double click on it, this is what brings up and comes. And all this is working with the core framework. It's the same exact thing as when you click on a menu item or when you double click. It just all, you could decide, for example, if I click on icon here, somewhere here, I'm going to be deciding and telling it when somebody clicks on it, where does the window appear? Let me see if I can find a better example. And part of me, like I said, I'm just getting excited here and getting ahead of myself, but we're going to have separate webinars on these. There's way too much to cover here, and I will probably not be able to stride surfer, but this is what I was going after. So when one of these apps open, you have a lot of options here that where you want them to go. They can go into the right overlay, they can go into center overlay, they can go full screen, they can show inline, which means within the same frame, and you can have it open in new window or so forth. So it's really cool. We have the framework is designed. That's why it took 2 years for us to get to where we are, is we want to design it correctly. So, you could literally build everything and not have to worry about the UI component, because that's where 80% of the dev time goes in. And that's not the important part. The important part is your business logic. So this kind of basically takes care of all that for you. So this is the hierarchy of how the project is set up. So all the extensions, the UX extensions, as I said, you'll find there. We've covered and looked at all the libraries. Provider. So there's two providers out of the box for Vanjaro. One is the authentication provider. And what this does, it swaps out the DNN authentication provider, which allows us to see the custom login page and not the DNN login page. This was super important. The reason we did that is if you do control equals login into a DNN side, it will still inject a DNN module to that. To kind of swap that functionality out, we had to replace with our own authentication provider. But that's all it is, just a UI change. Underneath everything else, the authentication is working the same way. So if I were to do control equals login, it will take me to a Vanjaro login, Manjaro UI, and so forth. Now, how is this UI driven? Like I said, everything 100% is driven through theme, every single front-end permission. So if you were to go down here, you will see there's a login block. Again, this is a server-side component. Now we don't have a login skin object in DNN, but we have a login block here, which is being driven through CSS HTML here. So the theme has full control over presentation. So that's that. Now the other authentication, the other provider we have is we have a mail provider, Vanjaro mail provider, and this is nothing new, but all it's doing is instead of sending it off, so the default DNN mail provider basically sends off the mail to the SMTP and it's done. What that does, it creates a lag, it creates a delay. So when you click on an action, it has to wait for the server to acknowledge and finish that before the page is processed. Traditionally, we've been solving that at mandeeps.com, that we have had our own scheduler, which basically all the emails get queued into a table and the scheduler goes in and then sends them out as it needs to. This allows us to scale. We can, even if there's 10,000 emails to go, it doesn't have a performance impact on your site. So we basically extended that to Vanjaro because, the Vanjaro.com is basically a donation from mandeeps.com, or 10 years worth of IP. And so we've taken that, and basically the mail provider does, instead of handing it off to SMTP, it just puts into a table. And once it puts into a table, we have a scheduled task that goes in and kind of takes care of it. And you could have 50,000 emails going out, or you can have 500. It makes no difference to your actual website performance. So that's, in a nutshell, an overview of 70 different projects. Now, I do want to do a quick so there's a question in chat, can I view this recording later? I'm a connection issues. Absolutely. So this webinar is being recorded. We'll have a recording posted online. So you'll be happy. You'll be able to go ahead and refer back to it. Absolutely. So what I want to do is just to kind of finish this webinar for dev environment is just quickly create a new branch, do a pull request, and just show how that works. So you've got your dev environment set up. Let's say if you had to make a contribution to the source code, and if you wanted to change something, how easy would that be? So what I'm going to do is just click on let's create a new branch, and I'll just call it video overlay text. And I'm cheating. I really don't have anything to contribute. I'm just going to find an existing closed pull request and just get the code from there and go from there. So I just created a new branch here. What I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and take a look at, let's go to Manjaro platform. I know there was an issue that was just recently solved. So let's go to pull request. I'm going to go to close pull request, and somewhere here, add something. Video overlay? No? Maybe. Okay, there's way too much. There's a lot happened between yesterday and today. So we're just going to go with our own example. Let's just say I had to make a simple CSS change. So let's, I'm going to find something. Let's go to our skin project, and then there's the skin.css. And let's say there's some change here. I remember seeing something with overlay, but I don't see it. But a very, very simple change. And I'm just doing this for experiment. And so we're not going to sub this pull request or anything. But let's say we didn't need this to be center aligned. It needed to be left aligned. So I'm doing a very simple change here. I made a change, one small change to the file. And if I go to my git changes, I see that. So I can go ahead and now say, in my commit that, okay, changed model header to left. And we'll commit this. We commit it, and we're gonna go ahead and hit sync, which basically does a push and a pull for us. Now, when you do this for the very first time, I'm gonna go ahead and push this. For some reason, didn't push it. When you do this for the very first time, Visual Studio will ask you to provide your GitHub username and your email address, and it will ask you to sign into GitHub so it can do that association. Since we went back to a backup, that was kind of done for me, so we didn't get to see that stuff, but it will do that. So now I've pushed this change out. I can go ahead and create a pull request right here on the top. You can go ahead and click on that. And if you see, it's brought my information is. Now, normally what you want to do is you want to go ahead and link an issue to it. So you can say it closes, and you can just put an issue there. So for example, this one, and just hit create pull request. And in my case, that is not the issue that I'm closing. So I'm just going to say just an example PR for webinar, and then we'll go ahead and create that pull request. And that pull request is now ready. So if you go to Vanjaro platform and if you look at pull request, you will see right there, change model header alignment to left. That is a PR that was submitted Meet Monday a few minutes ago. And then at this point, our dev team will basically review it and queue it. And from there, they will accept it or provide feedback in terms of review. And it goes from there. All right, we are very close to the time, 10:55. That is in a 55 minutes of time. That's the best I could do. So we got the dev environment set up, and we're going to start having dev webinars every 2 weeks instead of every month. So there'll be a webinar every 2 weeks now. If there's a particular topic you want to see covered in the next 2 weeks, the next webinar, whether it's building a design block, an app, something else along those lines, just put it in, and we'll be happy to consider that. But we will have a dev-focused webinar every 2 weeks going forward, and we'll go from there. So at this time, I'll be happy to address any questions if there are any, either through chat or feel free to jump in. All right, there's no other questions. I know there were a lot of folks who were on discussions and sent a lot of emails saying they can't wait a month to see how to set up that environment. I apologize. We got our hands tied with a ton of stuff, but I promise, like I said, we'll have these dev series focused webinars in 2 weeks now, and we will start building in Manjaro. You do have everything you need to know now to be able to build the source code and to do PR requests, and only get better from here. So thank you everyone for joining, and we'll wrap it up here. Thank you. Bye-bye.